Hello, welcome to my first revision vlog on Wuthering Heights. The idea of this is just to kickstart your revision by going over the first few chapters, so let's start with the plot of the first chapter. The novel starts in 1801 with Lockwood renting a property at Thrushcross Grange. He comes to the ancient manor of Wuthering Heights, which is 4 miles from the Grange, and meets his landlord Heathcliff. It's a wild and stormy countryside. Wuthering Heights is described as being battered by the power of the north wind, with a few stunted firs at an excessive slant and gaunt thorns, which reflects the characters who live there, because they give vent to their various passions as they confront the storms of life, in contrast to the calm restraint of the socially conventional living of those at Thrushcross Grange. Lockwood initially doesn't understand Heathcliff's world. He comes from a rational world of social convention. Heathcliff inhabits a world of passion, and when they meet, there's a very firm gate between them. We learn that Lockwood has come to Thrushcross Grange to recover from a relationship that didn't even get going, and the way he describes this is really telling. He doesn't even use the word love directly, except in quotation marks. He uses euphemisms like over head and ears, and it's obvious he hasn't even formed a relationship with her. She's just a concept in his head. He describes her as a real goddess, and he doesn't give himself a chance to develop a relationship because he shrinks icily into himself. And this, for me, is an example of the central theme of the novel, the opposition between Lockwood's rational, constrained world of social convention and Heathcliff's unrestrained world of passion. This division is written into a whole set of binary oppositions that structure the novel. It's even written into their names. Lockwood's world is the indoor world, constrained behind the locked wooden doors. Heathcliff's is the outdoor world of the unrestrained heathland, where life can be lived on the cliff edge. This opposition between emotional freedom and social constraint is developed throughout the novel. It is expressed in the contrast, for example, between the children playing freely on the moors while the rest of the community are indoors listening to the sermons in church, and it's ultimately expressed, of course, by the decision Catherine faces between marrying Heathcliff for love or marrying Edgar to get on in society. The opposition between nature and culture is there from the outset, and the fact that Lockwood cannot even form relationships and try to find a happy life if he lives locked in by social convention and unable to express his passions means that the novel is arguing you must not ignore your passions. Look at the price Catherine pays for her decision to ignore her passion for Heathcliff and choose the socially conventional marriage to Edgar. But is the novel arguing that we should just follow our passions, or is it arguing for a balance between the two? Unbridled passion in the novel does come across quite ugly. Look at Hindley's angry jealousy, or Heathcliff at his vengeful worst. Social convention on its own is equally given very short shrift. Look at Joseph's religious ranting, for example. And I think the fact that the second half of the novel seeks to unite the two houses and unite young Cathy and Hareton seems to suggest that Bronte's arguing for some balance between nature and culture. Anyway, to get back to the plot, once Lockwood leaves Wuthering Heights, having misinterpreted the relationships between all the characters, he meets the housekeeper Nellie Dean at Thrushcross Grange, and she tells him the backstory of these characters, and this forms the majority of the novel, which is Lockwood's written recollection of what Nellie Dean tells him. And because Nellie Dean is drawing her information from other characters and what they've heard, or from letters that they've written, the narrative point of view in the novel works like a Russian doll, with each story encapsulated inside another. I think there are several reasons why Bronte's done this, but one of them is to enable us to see through the perspective of each individual narrator and to be informed by a whole tapestry of different voices from different houses and different classes, and this helps prevent us from becoming too biased towards a particular point of view. In fact, there's considerable art to the way Bronte tells the story in these opening chapters. Think, for example, about the way Lockwood is presented. He keeps making blunders when he meets the characters at Wuthering Heights because he is prejudiced by the assumptions of his own class. For example, he describes Hareton as repulsive, even though he receives far more courtesy from Hareton than from any other character. And he finds Hareton repulsive because Hareton comes from a lower class, or seems to. He also judges young Cathy by what he describes as her most exquisite little face, and even thinks about flirting with her, rather arrogantly, frankly. He's completely ignorant of her capacity for developing a high-quality relationship herself with Hareton. So we learn very quickly not to trust the limited individual prejudice perspective of the narrator and welcome the multi-voice narrative that we get through Nellie. Chapter 3 is an exquisite piece of storytelling. Remember the confusion of the scratch names in the wood of the oak closet of Catherine's room that Lockwood sleeps in. The names are Catherine Heathcliff, Catherine Linton, Catherine Anshaw. Remember Catherine's notes in the margins of the books in her library, which form a sketchy diary giving us this insight into Catherine's voice from her youth, including a scene where Joseph gives her and Heathcliff a scripture lesson on Hindley's orders. And then Lockwood slips from this into a sleep where he has two dreams. And in the first dream, he has to endure a sermon from James Branderham. And he's being escorted to the chapel by Joseph, and Joseph's carrying a heavy cudgel. And in this dream, James Branderham is going to publicly expose him for gapingly distorting his visage at the 490 sermon points that Brabenham has come up with. Well, Lockwood's crime in this dream then, his sin, is showing genuine feelings. And for this sin he's then surrounded by all congregation's staffs and cudgels and given a sound beating for it. As if this wasn't bad enough, he then falls into a second dream where he hears the wind and the snow and what he thinks is the branch of a tree tapping at the casement window, and he gets up to open it, but the window seems soldered, so he breaks the glass in order to get at the branch, and instead of the branch, closes not on the branch, but on the fingers of an ice-cold hand. And there's a voice sobbing at him, "Let me in, let me in. I'm Catherine Linton, I've come home, I've lost my way in the moor." Two things then happen, and they're pretty interesting. The first is that he then sees a child's face, and the child won't let his arm go. So he pulls the wrist of the child onto the broken pane of glass until the blood runs down from it and soaks the bedclothes. This is in order to break the connection so he can withdraw his own hand safely back inside. And once he does that, he then builds up a pile of Catherine's books to block the hole in the glass. The child, meanwhile, still won't be quiet, and he shrieks, and his shriek then wakes Heathcliff, who comes in, and he tells Heathcliff that some spirit called Catherine Linton has been trying to get through the upstairs window, and then when he's leaving, he sees Heathcliff calling out the window for Catherine to come in, and he then describes that as raving, as a madness, a folly. Now this is of course a very Gothic chapter, and it's a very disturbing one. Gothic novels ask questions about the boundaries between binary oppositions, and we know what the opposition is here. It's the opposition between being cultured and not showing your feelings, the sin he was being punished for in the first dream, and the passionate expression of feelings from the waif Catherine Linton, who's been crying for 20 years to cross the barrier back to Heathcliff. The fact that the window is broken shows us that this comfortable separation between cultured and passionate behaviour is not so clear-cut after all. And Lockwood's response, where he brutally cuts the wrist of a child against the glass, shows us that when he is threatened, when Lockwood's threatened, when the barrier between nature and culture is broken, Lockwood is ruthless and pitilessly violent. So there is no real barrier between nature and culture. It's very frail. For Lockwood to then dismiss Heathcliff's plea through the window for Catherine to come to him as raving, as folly, that's just hypocritical, because we now know that the cultured people who live at Thrushcross Grange are just as capable of violence. They just cover it up with the veneer of civilization. Okay, so that's it. That was a fairly quick jaunt through the first 3 chapters of Wuthering Heights. I hope you found it useful, and good luck with the rest of your revision.